when 29-year-old diesel mechanic Valentina Torres signed the papers to buy a rusted cruise ship for $50,000 at a maritime salvage auction. She thought she was making the biggest mistake of her life. But hidden within the vessel's corroded hull lay evidence of a conspiracy that would expose decades of insurance fraud, reveal the fate of hundreds of missing passengers, and ultimately make her one of the wealthiest whistleblowers in maritime history. Before we dive into this incredible story, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this blow your mind, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow I've got something even more unbelievable lined up for you. The salt-laden wind whipped across the industrial docks of Harborcrest Bay, carrying with it the acrid smell of rust, diesel fuel, and decades of maritime decay. Valentina Torres stood at the edge of Pier 47, her calloused hands gripping the cold metal railing as she stared at what had to be the most spectacularly bad decision of her 29 years on this earth. The MS Oceanic Majesty stretched before her like a monument to abandonment. 900 feet of what had once been gleaming white steel now resembled the bleached bones of some massive sea creature, left to rot under the unforgiving Pacific Northwest sun. Paint peeled from its hull in long, curling strips that fluttered in the wind like dead skin. Windows that had once offered panoramic ocean views to wealthy passengers were now shattered spiderwebs of glass, their jagged edges catching the late afternoon light and throwing it back in angry, fractured rainbows. Valentina had never imagined she would become the owner of a cruise ship, especially not one that looked like it belonged in a maritime graveyard. At 29, she was the third generation of Torres women to run a marine diesel repair business in Harborcrest Bay, a weathered coastal town that had seen better days back when the fishing industry still thrived, and before corporate shipping giants had swallowed up most of the local maritime operations. Her grandmother, Valentina Torres, had started Torres Marine Services in 1978 with nothing but a toolbox, a fierce work ethic, and an almost supernatural understanding of diesel engines. Elena had passed that knowledge to Valentina's mother, Carmen, who had expanded the business through the prosperous 80s and 90s. But Carmen had died in a workplace accident when Valentina was just 19, leaving her to inherit not just the business, but the crushing weight of keeping 3 generations of hard work from dissolving into bankruptcy. Mija, her grandmother, had whispered during her final days in the hospital last year, her weathered hands still strong enough to grip Valentina's with surprising force. Sometimes the biggest treasures are hidden in the places that look the most worthless. Your grandfather taught me that during the war, when we had nothing but hope and each other, you have the Torres spirit. Don't let them convince you that being small means being weak. Now staring at the rust-streaked behemoth that was either going to save her business or finish destroying it, Valentina wondered if her grandmother's wisdom applied to floating disasters that had been abandoned by their previous owners like toxic waste. The auction had taken place 3 days ago in a cramped warehouse office that smelled of stale coffee and bureaucratic desperation. Valentina had driven there with her business partner and closest friend, Diego Ramirez, who had spent the entire 40-minute drive trying to talk her out of what he called the single dumbest idea in the history of marine salvage. "Val, listen to me," Diego had said, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel of their battered work truck. "You're talking about buying a cruise ship that's been sitting in legal limbo for 8 years. 8 years, Val. Do you know what happens to a ship when it sits abandoned for 8 years? Everything rots, everything corrodes, everything becomes worthless." But Valentina was desperate, and desperation had a way of making terrible ideas seem reasonable. Torres Marine Services was 3 months behind on rent, 2 months behind on equipment loans, and exactly 47 days away from having the bank foreclose on the business that represented everything her family had worked for over 4 decades. The contract that had brought her to the auction was both a lifeline and a trap. Titan Industrial Metals had approached her 6 weeks ago with an offer that seemed too good to be true. They needed 15,000 tons of marine-grade steel, and they were willing to pay premium prices for it. The catch was that they needed it within 6 months, and they needed it to meet specific metallurgical standards that were only found in ships built during a particular era. The steel from those mid-2000s cruise ships is perfect for our offshore drilling platform project. The Titan representative had explained during their meeting. It's the right alloy composition, the right thickness, and it's already been tested by years of saltwater exposure. We'll pay you $200 per ton, delivered and processed to our specifications. $200 per ton for 15,000 tons meant $3 million. Even after expenses, equipment rental, and processing costs, it would net Valentina enough money to pay off all her debts, modernize her equipment, and keep Torres Marine Services running for another decade. It was the kind of contract that could transform her struggling business into something sustainable, something that would honor her family's legacy while securing her future. The problem was finding 15,000 tons of the right kind of steel at a price she could afford. New steel was prohibitively expensive. Most salvage operations had already been picked clean by larger companies with better connections and deeper pockets, which brought her to the maritime salvage auction and the spectacularly risky idea of buying an entire cruise ship for scrap. The auctioneer had been a thin, nervous man named Harold Blackwood, who spoke in rapid, clipped sentences and seemed eager to get through the proceedings as quickly as possible. The warehouse had been filled with maybe 30 people, most of them representatives from large salvage companies or scrap metal dealers. Valentina had felt completely out of her depth, a small-town mechanic, playing in a game dominated by corporate players with resources she couldn't even imagine. Lot 17, Blackwood had announced, consulting his clipped port with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. The MS Oceanic Majesty, formerly operated by Meridian Cruise Lines, 900 feet in length, 15 decks, approximate displacement of 90,000 tons. Currently located at Harborcrest Bay salvage facility. Opening bid is $25,000. Valentina had expected a feeding frenzy, a ship that had cost over $400 million to build, being sold for scrap at a starting price that wouldn't buy a decent used car. But the warehouse had remained strangely quiet. A few of the corporate representatives had exchanged glances, but none had raised their hands. 25,000, Blackwood had repeated, his voice carrying a note of confusion. Do I have 25,000 for the Oceanic Majesty? More silence. Valentina had looked around the room, wondering if she was missing something obvious. Why wasn't anyone bidding on what seemed like the deal of the century? 20,000. Blackwood had tried, lowering the opening bid. 15,000. That's when Valentina had noticed the whispered conversations starting around the room. Fragments of sentences that made her stomach clench. Sealed Coast Guard files. Insurance investigation. Radioactive materials. Asbestos contamination. Diego had grabbed her arm. Val, no. Whatever you're thinking, no. There's a reason nobody's bidding. Ships don't get abandoned like this unless something seriously wrong happened. But Valentina had been thinking about her grandmother's words, about the Torres legacy, about the $3 million contract sitting on her desk back at the shop. She had been thinking about 47 days until foreclosure, and the very real possibility that she would be the Torres woman who let 4 decades of family work die on her watch. 10,000, Blackwood had announced, desperation creeping into his voice. Can I get 10,000 for this vessel? Valentina's hand had shot up before her brain could stop it. Thank you, Blackwood had said, with obvious relief. 10,000 to the lady in the back. Do I hear 15? Silence. Going once at 10,000. Going twice. That's when another hand had gone up. A woman in an expensive suit that screamed corporate lawyer. 15,000. The woman had called out. Valentina's heart had sunk. She couldn't compete with corporate money. But then she had noticed something odd. The woman wasn't looking at the auctioneer. She was looking directly at Valentina, and her expression wasn't that of someone trying to win an auction. It was the expression of someone trying to send a message. Don't bid. Walk away. This is not for you, which had naturally made Valentina even more determined to bid. 20,000, she had called out, ignoring Diego's string of Spanish curses beside her. 25, the corporate woman had responded immediately. 30, 40. The bidding had continued in rapid escalation until Valentina found herself committed to paying $50,000 for a ship she had never seen, knew nothing about, and couldn't afford to maintain. But she had won. The corporate woman had stopped bidding at 45,000. Giving Valentina, Valentina, one Tina, 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 Tina, one 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 Tina, Tina, Pancina, 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 Tina, Pancina, Tina, Pancina, Tina, Pancina, Pancina, Tina, Tina, Pancina, Tina, Pancina, Pancina, Tina, Tina. Now, 3 days later, standing on the dock and looking at her purchase in the harsh light of reality, Valentina was beginning to understand what that look had meant. The MS Oceanic Majesty wasn't just abandoned, it was actively avoided. Even the seagulls that normally covered every available surface in the harbor seemed to give it a wide berth. The ship had been built in 2006 by Meridian Cruise Lines, a company that had specialized in luxury Caribbean cruises for wealthy passengers who wanted to experience exotic destinations without sacrificing first-world amenities. According to the limited information Valentina had been able to find online, the Oceanic Majesty had been the crown jewel of Meridian's fleet, capable of carrying 4,000 passengers and 1,500 crew members on voyages that lasted anywhere from 7 days to 3 weeks. But something had gone wrong during the ship's final years of operation. The public records were frustratingly vague, filled with bureaucratic language about mechanical difficulties, passenger safety concerns, and regulatory compliance issues. Meridian had filed for bankruptcy in 2015, citing overwhelming legal costs and unforeseen operational challenges. The company's executives had scattered to the winds, many of them leaving the country entirely. What bothered Valentina most was the lack of detailed information about the ship's final voyages. Most cruise ships maintained meticulous records of their passenger manifests, crew rosters, and operational logs. These records were typically archived and available to researchers, maritime historians, and industry professionals. But the Oceanic Majesty's records from its last 2 years of operation seemed to have vanished entirely. Diego joined her on the dock, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the nearby deli and wearing the expression of someone attending a funeral. "Please tell me you've come to your senses," he said, handing her a cup. Please tell me we're here to take some pictures so you can list this thing on eBay and cut your losses." Valentina accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "I've been thinking about what you said, about ships not getting abandoned unless something serious happened." "Good, that's good. You're thinking rationally now. You're right, something serious did happen. But what if it wasn't what we think? What if the abandonment isn't about contamination or structural problems? What if it's about something else entirely?" Diego stared at her. "Val, you're scaring me. You have that look you get when you're about to do something that will probably kill us both." Valentina pointed toward the ship's superstructure, where the bridge and navigation equipment were housed. "Look at the condition of the upper decks. The paint is faded, and there's obviously some corrosion, but the structural elements look solid. The hull shows rust staining, but I don't see any evidence of major breaches or catastrophic damage." So if this ship was abandoned because of mechanical failure or safety issues, wouldn't there be more obvious signs of damage? Wouldn't there be hazmat warning signs, or Coast Guard barriers, or some kind of environmental containment? Diego followed her gaze, his expression thoughtful despite his obvious reluctance to encourage her line of thinking. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe the reason no one will bid on this ship has less to do with what's wrong with it, and more to do with what might be hidden inside it." "Hidden? Val, this is a cruise ship, not a pirate treasure chest." But Valentina was remembering her grandmother's stories about the early days of Torres Marine Services, when Elena had supplemented the business income by salvaging valuable components from abandoned vessels. She had developed an almost supernatural ability to identify ships that contained valuable cargo or equipment that their previous owners had either forgotten about or deliberately concealed. Abuela used to say that the most valuable salvage always came from the ships that other people were afraid to touch, Valentina said. She found a World War II transport vessel in 1983 that everyone said was worthless because it had been listed as carrying only ballast. Turned out it was loaded with rare earth metals that the original shipping company had failed to declare properly. Made enough money from that one find to buy the building that houses our shop. Diego shook his head. Val, that was different. That was wartime shipping, when records were incomplete and cargo manifests were often deliberately falsified for security reasons. This is a modern cruise ship. There are regulations, inspections, documentation requirements. Are there? Because I've been trying to find the documentation for this ship's final voyages, and it's like they never happened. No passenger lists, no crew records, no port authority logs. For a ship that was in operation until 2015, there's remarkably little information available about what it was actually doing during its last 2 years. Valentina pulled out her phone and showed Diego the results of her research. Look at this. Meridian's website archives show promotional materials for Caribbean cruises on the Oceanic Majesty through 2013. But then there's nothing. No cruise schedules, no passenger testimonials, no marketing materials. It's like the ship just disappeared from their operations while it was still technically in service. Maybe they were using it for charter operations, private cruises, corporate events, that kind of thing. Maybe, or maybe they were using it for something else entirely, something that required them to operate outside normal cruise industry regulations and documentation requirements. Diego was quiet for a long moment, studying the massive vessel with new eyes. You think they were smuggling something? I think Meridian Cruise Lines went bankrupt very suddenly. Their executives disappeared very quickly, and this ship has been sitting in legal limbo for 8 years, because no one wants to risk finding out what might be inside it. And you want to be the person who takes that risk. I want to be the person who turns a $50,000 investment into a $3 million contract. But if we happen to find something valuable along the way, I'm not going to complain. Valentina finished her coffee and tossed the empty cup into a nearby trash barrel. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? We strip it for scrap metal, fulfill our contract with Titan Industrial, and maybe find some valuable components along the way. Best case scenario, we discover whatever Meridian was hiding, and it turns out to be worth more than the ship itself. Worst case scenario, we find out why everyone else was afraid to touch this thing, and it kills us. Diego, you've been my partner for 8 years. Have I ever led you into a situation that actually killed us? No, but you've led me into several situations that should have killed us. Remember the incident with the Russian fishing vessel and the unexploded depth charges? Valentina grinned. We made $40,000 from that salvage operation. We also nearly blew up half the harbor, but we didn't. And we won't this time either, because we're going to be careful, methodical, and professional. We're going to document everything, follow all safety protocols, and approach this like the experienced marine salvage specialists we are. Diego sighed, recognizing the futile nature of arguing with Valentina when she had made up her mind about something. Fine, but I want hazard pay, and I want it in writing that if we find anything radioactive, cursed, or likely to attract federal investigators, we immediately call in the appropriate authorities and distance ourselves from this operation. Deal. They walked toward the gangway that connected the dock to the ship's main deck. The metal walkway had been installed by the salvage yard and looked sturdy enough, but it swayed slightly under their weight as they climbed aboard. Valentina noticed that the ship sat lower in the water than she would have expected for a vessel that was supposedly empty of fuel and cargo. The main deck was a chaos of decay and abandonment. What had once been polished teak planking was now warped and stained by years of weather exposure. Deck chairs were scattered randomly, many of them overturned or missing cushions. A swimming pool near the stern had been drained but not cleaned, leaving behind a basin filled with stagnant rainwater and debris. But beneath the surface deterioration, Valentina could see evidence of the ship's former grandeur. The railings were still solid, crafted from high-grade stainless steel that had resisted corrosion better than the decorative elements. The deck infrastructure looked sound, with no obvious signs of structural weakness or dangerous damage. "Where do you want to start?" Diego asked, pulling on work gloves and adjusting the tool belt around his waist. Valentina consulted the ship's basic layout diagram that had been included with her purchase documentation. "Engine room first. That's where the most valuable salvage will be, and it's also where we'll be able to assess the overall condition of the ship's mechanical systems." They made their way toward the stern, where a series of access hatches led to the ship's lower decks. The first hatch they tried was locked, but the lock was standard marine hardware that yielded quickly to Diego's lock-picking skills, a talent he had developed during a misspent youth that he rarely discussed in detail. The corridor beyond the hatch was dark and smelled of stale air, rust, and something else that Valentina couldn't immediately identify. She clicked on her powerful LED flashlight, revealing a passageway lined with metal walls and floors that had once been painted institutional white, but were now stained with rust and discolored by years of humidity. Emergency lighting should be on an independent battery system, Diego muttered, examining a wall-mounted fixture that remained dark despite their presence. Even on an abandoned ship, there should be some residual power for safety systems. Maybe the batteries finally died after 8 years. Maybe. Or maybe someone deliberately disabled the electrical systems before the ship was abandoned. They moved carefully through the corridor, their footsteps echoing in the enclosed space. Valentina noticed that many of the doors they passed were locked, which seemed unusual for a ship that had supposedly been stripped of valuable equipment before being put up for auction. The engine room access was located 4 decks down, reached by a series of metal stairways that descended into the heart of the ship. As they went deeper, the air grew thicker and more humid, and the sounds of the harbor above faded until they were surrounded by the absolute silence of an abandoned vessel. When they finally reached the engine room, Valentina's flashlight revealed a space that was both impressive and puzzling. The main engines were massive diesel units, each one the size of a small building, connected to generators and propulsion systems that represented millions of dollars in marine engineering. But unlike the upper decks, the engine room showed no signs of abandonment or neglect. "This doesn't make sense," Diego said, running his hand along one of the engine housings. "Look at this. No rust, no corrosion, no signs of saltwater damage. It's like this room has been maintained even while the rest of the ship was left to rot." Valentina examined the control panels and monitoring systems. "More than maintained. Look at these gauges. They're showing residual pressure in the fuel lines, temperature readings that suggest the engines were running recently." "Recently? Val, this ship has been abandoned for 8 years. Then explain this." Valentina pointed to a digital display that showed the current date and time, along with various engine parameters that were well within normal operating ranges. According to the monitoring system, the engines had been shut down less than 72 hours ago. Diego stared at the display, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. "Okay, that's definitely not normal. Ships that are abandoned for 8 years don't have active monitoring systems showing recent engine activity, which means either our information about this ship being abandoned is wrong, or someone has been using it for something that required functional engines and deliberate concealment." Valentina moved deeper into the engine room, her flashlight revealing additional anomalies. Fuel lines that should have been drained and sealed were still pressurized. Coolant systems showed evidence of recent circulation. Most tellingly, the engine logs showed entries dated within the past month. "Diego, look at this." She had found a maintenance logbook secured in a waterproof container near the main control console. The entries were handwritten in multiple languages, documenting routine engine maintenance, fuel consumption, and operational parameters for voyages that officially never happened. According to this log, the oceanic Majesty has been making regular trips between Harborcrest Bay and coordinates in international waters. Valentina read. Passenger capacity listed as variable, cargo manifest listed as classified. Duration of voyages ranging from 3 days to 2 weeks. Diego examined the logbook over her shoulder. "Val, we need to leave. Right now. Whatever this ship has been used for, it's not legitimate cruise operations, and we don't want to be here when whoever's been running it decides to come back." But Valentina was studying the coordinates listed in the logbook, her mind racing with possibilities. These coordinates are in the deep Pacific, at least 200 miles from any commercial shipping lanes. What would a cruise ship be doing that far out in international waters? Nothing good. "Come on, we're leaving." "Wait, look at this entry from last week." Valentina pointed to a notation that made her blood run cold. "Final voyage completed. Cargo transferred to secure storage. vessel prepared for permanent disposal, cleanup crew scheduled for. The entry ended abruptly, as if the writer had been interrupted. Cleanup crew, Diego repeated. Val, I really don't like the sound of cleanup crew. Neither do I. But I like the sound of cargo transferred to secure storage even less. Cargo worth concealing is usually cargo worth a lot of money. They spent another hour exploring the engine room and adjacent mechanical spaces, documenting everything they found with photographs and detailed notes. The evidence of recent activity was undeniable, but it raised more questions than it answered. Why would someone spend years maintaining a ship that was supposedly abandoned? What kind of cargo required such elaborate concealment? And why had the operation apparently ended just days before Valentina purchased the vessel? As they prepared to return to the upper decks, Valentina's flashlight caught something that made her freeze. Mounted on the wall near the main engine controls was a small brass plaque that she hadn't noticed before. Property of Meridian Cruise Lines, unauthorized access prohibited, security level, C. Cosmic clearance, required. Cosmic clearance. Diego read the plaque over her shoulder. What the hell is cosmic clearance? Valentina had heard the term before, during her brief stint in the Navy before she returned home to take over the family business. It's a military security classification, above top secret. It's used for operations that involve national security at the highest levels. Military? Val, this is supposed to be a cruise ship. Supposed to be, but cruise ships don't require cosmic clearance, and they don't have military-grade security classifications posted in their engine rooms. As they climbed back toward the main deck, Valentina's mind raced with the implications of what they had discovered. The MS Oceanic Majesty wasn't just an abandoned cruise ship. It was a vessel that had been used for classified operations, maintained in secret for years after its official abandonment, and recently prepared for disposal by people who clearly had resources and authority far beyond anything associated with legitimate maritime salvage, which meant that her $50,000 purchase might have been the bargain of the century or the biggest mistake of her life. And given the nature of the cargo that had apparently been transferred to secure storage, Valentina suspected she was about to find out which. The morning after their initial exploration, Valentina arrived at the ship before dawn, armed with a thermos of strong coffee and a detailed plan of investigation. Diego's concerns about their safety were valid, but they couldn't afford to abandon the project based on speculation. She had 43 days until the bank foreclosed on Torres Marine Services, and the Titan industrial contract remained their only viable path to survival. But the discovery of recent engine activity and military security classifications had fundamentally changed her approach to the salvage operation. Instead of simply stripping the ship for scrap metal, she was now conducting what amounted to a forensic investigation of a vessel that had clearly been used for purposes far beyond passenger cruises. Diego arrived 20 minutes later, carrying enough electronic detection equipment to outfit a small reconnaissance mission. I borrowed some toys from my cousin Roberto, he explained, setting down a heavy duffel bag filled with sophisticated scanning devices, metal detectors, thermal imaging cameras, electromagnetic field sensors, and a few other gadgets that he uses for his underwater archaeology work. Roberto does underwater archaeology. Roberto does whatever pays well and doesn't ask too many questions about his past. The point is, if there's something hidden on this ship, we'll find it. They began with the passenger decks, methodically working their way through what had once been luxury accommodations for wealthy travelers. The staterooms were uniformly stripped of valuable fixtures and furnishings, but the basic infrastructure remained intact. Valentina noticed that many of the rooms showed signs of recent occupancy, beds that had been slept in and never properly made, personal items forgotten in drawers, bathroom toiletries that hadn't had time to completely evaporate. "Look at this," Diego called from a suite near the bow. "Check the dates on these newspapers." Valentina examined the publications scattered on a coffee table. They were international newspapers in multiple languages, all dated within the past 6 months. The headlines covered global political developments, economic fluctuations, and regional conflicts, but there was a pattern to the stories that caught her attention. These articles all deal with maritime shipping routes, international trade disputes, and changes in customs enforcement policies, she observed. "It's like someone was monitoring global shipping patterns and regulatory changes, or planning how to avoid them." They continued their systematic search, using Roberto's detection equipment to scan for hidden compartments, concealed storage areas, and structural anomalies. The thermal imaging camera revealed several sections of wall that showed different heat signatures than surrounding areas, suggesting hollow spaces behind what appeared to be solid barriers. In the ship's former casino, Diego's electromagnetic sensor began registering unusual readings near what had once been the main gaming floor. The area was now empty, except for bolted-down metal supports, where slot machines and gaming tables had been mounted, but the sensor indicated significant metallic masses behind the decorative wall panels. "There's definitely something back there," Diego said, studying the sensor readouts. "Something big, and something that contains a lot of metal." Valentina examined the wall panels more closely. They were designed to look like permanent fixtures, but she could see subtle signs that they had been recently installed or modified. The screws holding them in place were newer than the surrounding hardware, and the paint color was slightly different from adjacent surfaces. "Help me remove this panel," she said, pulling a cordless drill from her tool bag. The panel came away easily, revealing a hidden storage compartment that extended deep into the ship's superstructure. Inside, carefully secured with shock-absorbing foam and waterproof coverings, were dozens of metal cases arranged in precise rows. Diego whistled softly. "Those aren't passenger luggage." The cases were military specification storage containers, each one bearing alphanumeric codes and warning labels in multiple languages. Valentina photographed the labels before carefully opening the nearest case, revealing contents that made her stomach drop. Gold bars, dozens of them, each one stamped with assay marks and serial numbers that identified them as refined precious metal bullion. According to the documentation sealed in plastic sleeves alongside the gold, each bar was worth approximately $60,000 at current market prices. "Val," Diego's voice was tight with concern. "How many cases are in here?" Valentina quickly counted the visible containers. "At least 40, maybe 50. If they're all filled with gold, that's $3 million. Minimum, more than 3 million. Look at these documentation packets." Valentina had opened several cases and found that while many contained gold bars, others held different types of valuable cargo. Rare earth metals that were essential for electronics manufacturing, conflict diamonds that had somehow avoided international monitoring systems, and most puzzling of all, hard drives and data storage devices that were secured in climate-controlled, electromagnetically shielded cases. "This isn't random smuggling," she said, studying the meticulous organization of the hidden cargo. "This is systematic wealth extraction. Someone was using this ship to move valuable assets out of countries where they couldn't legally export them, or into countries where they couldn't legally import them." Diego had found additional documentation that shed light on the scope of the operation. Shipping manifests listed destinations, including ports in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, Monaco, and other locations known for financial secrecy and minimal customs oversight. The dates on the manifests extended back over 4 years, suggesting a long-term operation that had moved hundreds of millions of dollars in valuable cargo. But the most disturbing documents were passenger lists that bore no resemblance to typical cruise ship rosters. Instead of families on vacation or retirees enjoying luxury travel, the manifests listed individuals identified only by code names and nationality abbreviations. Many entries included notations like diplomatic immunity, corporate extraction, and priority relocation. Valentina, Diego said quietly, "I think this ship was being used to smuggle people, not just cargo. What kind of people require priority relocation and diplomatic immunity? The kind who have very powerful enemies and very valuable information." As they continued exploring the hidden compartment, they discovered additional evidence of the ship's true purpose. Communication equipment that was far more sophisticated than anything needed for passenger services. Navigation systems that could operate independently of standard maritime tracking networks. And most tellingly, a series of modified staterooms that had been converted into secure holding areas with reinforced doors and no windows. "This is a floating safe house," Valentina realized. They were using it to move high-value assets and high-risk individuals between countries without going through official customs or immigration channels. Which explains why the ship has been maintained in secret and why no one wanted to bid on it at the auction. Whoever was running this operation couldn't afford to have the ship examined by legitimate salvage operators. But their investigation had raised a critical question: if the cargo and passengers had been transferred to secure storage, as indicated in the engine room logs, where had they been taken? And more importantly, were the people running this operation planning to return for anything they might have missed? The answer came sooner than they expected. Valentina was photographing the contents of a case filled with rare metal ingots when Diego grabbed her arm. "Do you hear that?" She stopped and listened. In the distance, barely audible over the normal sounds of harbor activity, was the low rumble of approaching marine engines. Multiple engines, moving in formation. They climbed quickly to the main deck and used binoculars to scan the harbor entrance. 3 vessels, flanked by 2 smaller speedboats. The formation was too precise to be coolly assembled, and the boats were moving with the kind of coordination that suggested professional maritime operation. "They're heading straight for us," Diego observed. "How long until they reach the ship?" 10 minutes, maybe 15. Valentina's mind raced through their options. They could try to leave the ship before the boats arrived, but that would mean abandoning the evidence they had discovered, and potentially missing the Chelsea. Or they could stay and confront whoever was approaching, there potentially gaining crucially unregistered, but potentially gaining crucial information exposed. The decision was made for them. When Diego spotted movement on the approaching yacht. "Telescopic sight," he said grimly. "Someone on that boat is responsible for a hide suit. They know we're here, and they know we've been exploring the space away in the future. Working with desperate efficiency, they returned to the hidden compartment and photographed every case, every document, and every piece of evidence they could access. Valentina used her phone to record video testimony describing their discoveries, while Diego created detailed sketches of the compartment layout and cargo organization. But as they worked, they discovered something that changed everything. Hidden beneath the cases of gold and precious metals was a section of flooring that appeared to be removable. Using crowbars from their toolkit, they pried up the panels to reveal another hidden compartment, this one containing something far more valuable than gold or rare metals. "Jesus," Diego whispered. The lower compartment contained hundreds of hard drives, data storage devices, and encrypted communication equipment. But more importantly, it held detailed records of financial transactions, bank account numbers, corporate ownership structures, and government contracts that painted a picture of corruption spanning multiple countries and involving billions of dollars. According to the documents, the operation aboard the Oceanic Majesty had been facilitating not just the movement of valuable cargo, but the systematic looting of national treasuries, corporate pension funds, and international aid programs. The passenger lists weren't just wealthy individuals seeking to avoid taxes, they were government officials, corporate executives, and international criminals who were fleeing with stolen assets before their crimes could be discovered. "This is evidence of organized financial warfare," Valentina said, scanning through transaction records that detailed the theft of earthquake relief funds from Haiti, pension money from Eastern European countries, and development aid intended for African nations. "Someone has been using this ship to help criminals steal from some of the poorest countries in the world." The scale of the theft was staggering. According to the financial records, the operation had facilitated the movement of over $12 billion in stolen assets over a 4-year period. The participants included government ministers, corporate executives, international aid officials, and military contractors who had systematically diverted funds intended for disaster relief, infrastructure development, and humanitarian assistance. But the most shocking discovery was the identity of the operation's primary coordinator. "Look at this," Diego said, holding up a photograph that had been secured in a waterproof envelope. "This is the woman who was bidding against you at the auction." The photograph showed the corporate lawyer who had tried to outbid Valentina, but she wasn't alone. She was standing on the deck of the Oceanic Majesty, alongside a group of individuals that Valentina recognized from international news coverage. Government officials who had recently been accused of corruption, corporate executives who had disappeared amid fraud investigations, and military contractors who had been linked to war profiteering scandals. She wasn't trying to buy the ship for salvage, Valentina realized. She was trying to prevent anyone else from discovering what was hidden inside it. The approaching boats were now close enough that they could hear individual voices carried on the harbor wind. Diego used the binoculars to get a better look at the passengers. "I count at least 12 people spread across the 3 boats, he reported. "They're armed, they're organized, and they're definitely not here for a friendly conversation. How much time do we have? 5 minutes, maybe less." Valentina made a rapid decision that would determine not just their immediate safety, but the fate of evidence that could expose one of the largest financial crimes in modern history. "We're not running," she announced. "We're documenting everything we can and preparing to defend ourselves if necessary. Val, these people have killed to protect this secret." The passenger manifests include individuals who are wanted by international law enforcement. This isn't just smuggling, it's organized crime at the highest levels, which is exactly why we can't let them bury this evidence again. Using her phone, Valentina began uploading photographs and video to cloud storage accounts, ensuring that even if something happened to them, the evidence would survive. Diego gathered the most critical documents and sealed them in waterproof containers that they could hide elsewhere on the ship. But as they worked, they discovered one final piece of evidence that revealed the true scope of what they had stumbled into. Tucked beneath the financial records was a briefing document marked Operation Midnight Tide, Final Phase Authorization. The document outlined plans for the permanent disposal of the Oceanic Majesty and all evidence of the smuggling operation, scheduled to take place exactly 1 week after Valentina had purchased the ship at auction. They were planning to sink it, Diego said, reading over her shoulder. They were going to destroy the ship and all the evidence, claim it as an insurance loss, and walk away clean. Except I bought it first. Except you bought it first, and now you're the only thing standing between them and the perfect crime. The sound of boat engines was growing louder, and they could now see figures moving on the decks of the approaching vessels. The lead yacht was impressive, clearly worth millions of dollars, and equipped with communication arrays that suggested sophisticated coordination capabilities. But Valentina noticed something that gave her hope. Diego, look at the harbor patrol boat near the entrance. It's changing course. Indeed, a Coast Guard vessel that had been conducting routine patrols was now heading in their direction, apparently drawn by the unusual activity around the abandoned cruise ship. Do you think they're responding to the approaching boats, or are they coming to investigate us? Either way, it's better than facing these people alone. As the final minutes ticked away before the confrontation that would determine their fate, Valentina reflected on the chain of events that had brought them to this moment. Her desperate attempt to save the family business had uncovered evidence of crimes that spanned continents and involved the theft of resources intended to help the world's most vulnerable populations. The woman who had bid against her at the auction was now approaching with what appeared to be a small army, determined to reclaim the evidence and eliminate any witnesses to the operation. But they hadn't counted on Valentina's determination, Diego's technical skills, or the possibility that their activities might attract the attention of law enforcement. The next few minutes would determine whether justice would finally catch up with the criminals who had used the Oceanic Majesty as their floating headquarters, or whether Valentina and Diego would become the latest victims of an operation that had already caused immeasurable harm to millions of people around the world. As the boats drew alongside the cruise ship and voices began shouting orders in multiple languages, Valentina gripped the waterproof case containing the most damning evidence and prepared to fight for something far more important than her family's business. She was fighting for the truth. The confrontation Valentina had been dreading never came. Instead, the lead yacht pulled alongside the Oceanic Majesty and cut its engines, maintaining a position just beyond easy boarding range. For 20 tense minutes, the two groups observed each other across 30 feet of churning harbor water, while the Coast Guard patrol boat approached from the opposite direction. The corporate lawyer from the auction stood at the yacht's bow, a satellite phone pressed to her ear as she engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation. Occasionally, she would lower the phone and use binoculars to study Valentina and Diego, her expression unreadable behind expensive sunglasses. When the Coast Guard vessel finally reached the scene, the dynamic shifted dramatically. The patrol boat's captain, a weathered woman in her 50s named Commander Sarah Petrosky, used a loudspeaker to address all parties simultaneously. "This is United States Coast Guard vessel Vigilant. All civilian craft are required to state your business and maintain safe distances from the commercial salvage operation currently in progress." The corporate lawyer immediately responded via marine radio, identifying herself as legal counsel for Meridian Holdings, conducting authorized inspection of company assets. Her voice carried the kind of casual authority that suggested she was accustomed to having officials defer to her claims. Valentina keyed her own handheld radio. "This is Valentina Torres, legal owner of the MS Oceanic Majesty under valid salvage purchase. I have documentation proving my ownership rights to this vessel and all contents therein. Commander Petrovsky requested that both parties provide their documentation for review. What followed was a bureaucratic standoff that lasted 3 hours and ultimately changed the course of the entire investigation. The lawyer's claim to represent Meridian Holdings proved problematic when Coast Guard records showed that Meridian Cruise Lines had been dissolved in 2015, with all assets supposedly liquidated through bankruptcy proceedings. No entity called Meridian Holdings appeared in any corporate registration database, and the lawyer's credentials, while impressive, did not include authorization to represent a company that officially no longer existed. Valentina's documentation, by contrast, was ironclad. Her purchase receipt, title transfer documents, and salvage rights were all properly filed and legally valid. More importantly, her discovery of active maintenance logs and recent engine operation had triggered what Commander Petrovsky described as mandatory investigation protocols for vessels engaged in undeclared maritime activities. "Ma'am," the commander informed the lawyer via radio, "I'm going to need your vessel to return to port for document verification. Any attempt to board or interfere with the legitimate salvage operation will be considered maritime trespass and dealt with accordingly." The yacht departed with obvious reluctance, but not before the lawyer made one final radio transmission that chilled Valentina's blood. "Miss Torres, you have no idea what you've stumbled into. Some secrets are buried for very good reasons. Consider this a friendly warning." Once the immediate threat had passed, Commander Petrovsky boarded the Oceanic Majesty to conduct what she described as a routine inspection of salvage activities. But her questions suggested that the Coast Guard's interest went far beyond routine maritime safety concerns. "Ma'am," she said to Valentina as they stood on the ship's main deck, "I need you to understand that this vessel has been flagged in our database for quite some time. We've had reports of unusual activity, unexplained movements, and suspected violations of customs regulations. Your purchase and subsequent investigation may have provided us with the legal access we've been seeking for years. Legal access to properly investigate what we've long suspected was a floating criminal enterprise. But we needed either a cooperative owner or probable cause for mandatory inspection. Your discovery of recent maintenance logs and operational evidence provides both." Commander Petrovsky's inspection team was unlike any routine Coast Guard unit Valentina had ever encountered. In addition to standard maritime safety personnel, the team included specialists in financial crimes, computer forensics, and international law enforcement coordination. Their equipment was sophisticated enough to make Diego's borrowed detection gear look primitive by comparison. But the most significant development came when Commander Petrovsky made a secure satellite phone call to what she described as appropriate federal authorities. Within 6 hours, the Oceanic Majesty had become the center of a major interagency investigation involving the FBI, Customs and Border Protection, the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and representatives from Interpol. Special Agent Marcus Webb of the FBI's International Organized Crime Unit arrived by helicopter at sunset, bringing with him a team of investigators who had apparently been preparing for this opportunity for years. Torres, Agent Webb said as they met in the ship's former dining room, now converted into a temporary command center, "I want you to understand that your purchase of this vessel has opened a door that law enforcement has been trying to get through for nearly a decade. The evidence you've discovered represents the culmination of multiple international investigations into what we believe is one of the largest financial crime networks in modern history." Webb spread a series of photographs and documents across the table. Valentina recognized some of the faces from the passenger manifests she had found.
but others were new to her. This organization calls itself the Midnight Syndicate, Webb explained. They specialize in helping corrupt officials, war criminals, and major financial criminals disappear with stolen assets. Over the past 8 years, we estimate they facilitated the theft and movement of over children, international aid programs, corporate pension funds, and private investment accounts.
40 billion? Diego whistled softly. That's more than the GDP of most countries. Exactly. And the Oceanic Majesty was their primary operational platform. A floating safe house, money laundering facility, and transportation network all rolled into one. They could pick up their clients anywhere in international waters, move them and their stolen assets to safe havens, and do it all while maintaining the appearance of legitimate cruise ship operations. Webb showed them surveillance photographs taken by naval intelligence units, revealing the Oceanic Majesty at various locations around the globe. The ship had been spotted near the coasts of countries experiencing political upheaval, financial crisis, or military conflict, always in international waters, always maintaining enough distance from territorial boundaries to avoid direct legal jurisdiction. But how did they maintain the ship's operational status while keeping it officially abandoned? Valentina asked. Shell companies, fraudulent registrations, and corruption at multiple levels of maritime bureaucracy, Webb replied. They had customs officials, port authorities, and even some Coast Guard personnel on their payroll. The ship could operate freely because the people responsible for monitoring it were being paid to look the other way. The scope of the corruption was staggering. According to Webb's briefing materials, the Midnight Syndicate had penetrated maritime regulatory agencies in over 20 countries, creating a network of complicit officials who ensured that the Oceanic Majesty could operate without effective oversight. But the syndicate's activities went beyond simple financial crime. The modified staterooms Valentina had discovered were part of what Webb described as a human trafficking operation, targeting high-value individuals. They weren't just moving money, he explained. They were extracting people, government officials who had been caught stealing, corporate executives facing fraud charges, military commanders accused of war crimes, anyone with valuable information or stolen assets who needed to disappear quickly and permanently. The passenger manifests revealed the scope of this operation. Over 4 years, the Oceanic Majesty had transported over 300 individuals who were wanted by law enforcement agencies worldwide. Many had been declared dead in mysterious accidents or terrorist attacks, allowing them to assume new identities while their crimes went unpunished. Where did they take these people? Diego asked. That's what we're hoping your evidence will help us determine, Webb replied. We know the syndicate operates safe houses and financial havens in multiple countries, but we've never been able to locate their primary facilities or identify their leadership structure. The data storage devices you found may contain the information we need to finally shut them down. The investigation team worked through the night, carefully documenting and analyzing every piece of evidence Valentina and Diego had discovered. The hidden compartments yielded additional caches of documents, encrypted hard drives and communication equipment that painted an even more detailed picture of the syndicate's operations. But the most shocking discovery came when FBI computer specialists cracked the encryption on several of the data storage devices. Jesus Christ, Agent Webb muttered as he reviewed the decoded files. They weren't just stealing money, They were manipulating entire economies. The files revealed that the Midnight Syndicate had been coordinating financial attacks against developing nations, deliberately creating economic crises that would drive down asset values and create opportunities for massive theft. They had orchestrated currency manipulations, orchestrated bank failures, and even influenced political instability to create chaos that would cover their crimes. Look at this. Webb showed them a planning document titled Operation Cyclone Strike Venezuela Phase. They spent 2 years destabilizing Venezuela's economy, creating hyperinflation and political chaos. Then they extracted over $6 billion from the national treasury, while the government was too busy dealing with riots and economic collapse to notice the theft. Similar operations had been conducted in Ukraine, Syria, Haiti, and several African nations. The syndicate would identify countries with valuable natural resources or significant financial reserves, then use a combination of economic warfare, political manipulation, and strategic corruption to create opportunities for massive theft. They weren't just criminals, Valentina realized. They were economic terrorists. Exactly. And the Oceanic Majesty was their command and control center for these operations. Every major theft, every economic manipulation, every extraction operation was coordinated from this ship. But as the investigation deepened, Webb's team made a discovery that elevated the case from major financial crime to potential national security threat. Hidden among the financial records were documents revealing that the Midnight Syndicate had been selling stolen information to foreign intelligence agencies. Government secrets, military plans, diplomatic communications, and classified research data had all been extracted along with financial assets and sold to the highest bidders. They had access to classified information from over 30 countries, Webb explained. State secrets, military intelligence, diplomatic cables, research data from defense contractors. They weren't just stealing money, they were stealing national security assets and selling them to hostile foreign powers. The implications were staggering. The syndicate had compromised government officials and corporate executives who had access to sensitive information, then extracted that data along with financial assets when their operatives needed to disappear. The result was a systematic hemorrhaging of classified information that had potentially compromised national security operations worldwide. How much damage are we talking about? Diego asked. Impossible to calculate, Webb replied grimly. But based on the documents we've reviewed so far, they may have compromised every major Western intelligence operation in the Middle East and Eastern Europe over the past 5 years. As dawn broke over Harborcrest Bay, the investigation team had established a clear picture of the Midnight Syndicate's operations, but they had also uncovered evidence of an even more disturbing truth. The organization was still active, and Valentina's discovery of their headquarters ship had triggered what appeared to be an accelerated timeline for their final phase operations. The documents indicate they're planning something called Protocol 7. Webb explained during a briefing with the full investigation team. It appears to be a contingency plan for permanently shuttering while eliminating any evidence or witnesses that could threaten their leadership. Eliminating witnesses. Valentina's blood ran cold. I'm afraid so. The corporate lawyer who approached you yesterday represents what we believe is their enforcement division. Your discovery of this evidence has put you and Diego at the center of a very dangerous situation. Webb's expression was grave as he continued. The syndicate has spent years building this operation, and they've killed to protect it before. They're not going to simply walk away because their ship has been compromised. They're going to try to recover their evidence, eliminate any threats to their security, and activate whatever contingency plans they have in place for this scenario.
So what do? We use the evidence you found to identify and arrest the syndicate's leadership before they can implement Protocol 7. But that means continuing to investigate this ship, extracting every piece of information we can find, and accepting that you're now key witnesses in one of the most significant criminal cases in modern history.
Webb leaned forward, his expression serious. Miss Torres, Mr. Ramirez, I need you to understand what you're signing up for. This investigation could take months or even years to complete. You'll be under federal protection, your identities will be secured, and you'll be compensated for your cooperation. But you'll also be primary targets for an organization that has demonstrated they're willing to kill to protect their secrets. Valentina looked across the table at Diego, reading the concern and determination in his expression. They had stumbled into something far bigger than a simple salvage operation, but they had also uncovered evidence that could bring justice to an organization responsible for stealing from some of the world's most vulnerable populations. We're in, she said finally. These people have stolen aid money from disaster victims, pension funds from working families, and development assistance from countries that desperately need it. If we can help stop them, we have to try. Agent Webb nodded approvingly. Then let's get to work. Because according to the timeline in these documents, Protocol 7 is scheduled to activate in 72 hours. We have 3 days to identify the syndicate's leadership, locate their remaining assets, and prevent them from disappearing forever with $40 billion in stolen money. As the investigation team began implementing what Webb described as the largest coordinated financial crime investigation in FBI history, Valentina reflected on the chain of events that had brought them to this point. Her desperate attempt to save Torres Marine Services had evolved into a mission to expose one of the most sophisticated criminal organizations ever discovered. But the real work was just beginning. The 72-hour countdown to Protocol 7 became the most intense period of Valentina's life. The oceanic majesty transformed into a floating command center with federal agents, computer specialists, and international law enforcement coordinators working around the clock to extract every piece of actionable intelligence from the ship's hidden archives. Agent Webb's team had established 3 primary objectives: identify the Midnight Syndicate's leadership structure, locate their primary safehouse facilities, and prevent the activation of Protocol 7. Each goal seemed increasingly urgent as the investigation revealed the true scope of the organization's reach and the devastating consequences of allowing them to disappear permanently. The breakthrough came on the second day, when FBI computer forensics specialist Dr. Sarah Chen successfully decrypted what appeared to be the syndicate's master database. The files contained not just financial records and operational plans, but detailed personal profiles of every individual the organization had ever extracted, transported, or employed. This is essentially a criminal social network, Dr. Chen explained, as she displayed the data on multiple screens in the ship's converted command center. Every connection mapped, every transaction recorded, every operation documented. It's like they were maintaining a corporate database of international crime. The database revealed that the Midnight Syndicate was far more organized than anyone had suspected. Rather than a loose network of criminals, it operated like a multinational corporation with clearly defined departments, hierarchical management structures, and standardized operational procedures. There were divisions for financial services, transportation, security, intelligence gathering, and what the documents euphemistically called client relations. But the most shocking discovery was the identity of the organization's senior leadership. Jesus! Agent Webb muttered as Dr. Chen displayed a series of personnel files. These aren't just criminals. These are people who should have been in prison decades ago. The syndicate's board of directors read like a who's who of international fugitives. War criminals from the Balkans who had supposedly died in NATO bombing raids. Corporate executives from major financial institutions who had disappeared during fraud investigations. Military contractors who had vanished amid war profiteering scandals. Government officials who had been declared dead in terrorist attacks or plane crashes. They've been building this organization for over 20 years, Webb realized. Every time someone gets caught committing major financial crimes or war crimes, instead of facing justice, they fake their death and join the syndicate. It's like a criminal witness protection program for the world's worst people. The implications were staggering. The syndicate hadn't just been facilitating recent crimes, they had been providing sanctuary for wanted criminals for decades, allowing them to continue their operations under new identities while law enforcement agencies believed them to be dead. But the database also revealed something that changed the entire dynamic of the investigation: the location of the syndicate's primary facility. Seraphim Island, Dr. Chen announced, displaying satellite imagery on the main screen. It's a private island approximately 400 miles west of the Cayman Islands. According to these files, it's been the syndicate's operational headquarters for the past 8 years. The island was impressive by any standard. Nearly 6 square miles of tropical paradise, complete with multiple residential complexes, a private airstrip, deep water harbor facilities, and what appeared to be significant underground infrastructure. Satellite imagery showed construction that had clearly cost hundreds of millions of dollars. How did they acquire a private island without attracting attention? Diego asked. Shell companies, fraudulent documentation, and strategic corruption, Webb replied, studying the acquisition records. They purchased it through 17 different corporate entities, spanning 9 countries. To outside observers, it appeared to be a legitimate luxury resort development project. But Seraphim Island was far more than a luxury retreat. According to the syndicate's internal documents, it housed their primary money laundering facilities, secure communication networks, and what they called their client integration center. Essentially a facility for helping extracted criminals assume new identities and begin new lives. The island also served as the syndicate's strategic planning center, where they coordinated their economic warfare operations and planned their attacks on vulnerable nations. The facility included sophisticated computer networks, satellite communication systems, and intelligence analysis capabilities that rivaled those of major intelligence agencies. This is where they've been hiding all the stolen assets, Dr. Chen explained, displaying financial records that showed billions of dollars flowing through accounts registered to island-based shell companies. It's not just a safe house, it's the entire financial infrastructure for their operations. But the discovery of Seraphim Island's location also revealed why Protocol 7 was so urgently scheduled. According to the syndicate's internal communications, they had detected unusual activity around the oceanic Majesty and suspected that their operations had been compromised. They're not just planning to destroy evidence, Webb realized as he reviewed the Protocol 7 documentation. They're planning to evacuate the island and disappear permanently. Every criminal they've ever extracted, every stolen asset they've ever hidden, every piece of evidence that could expose them. The protocol was scheduled to activate in 18 hours, giving the syndicate's leadership and their clients enough time to transfer their assets to backup locations and disappear into new identities. Once Protocol 7 was complete, the investigation would hit a dead end, and some of the world's most wanted criminals would be permanently beyond the reach of law enforcement. We have to stop them, Valentina said, studying the satellite imagery of Seraphim Island. If they succeed in implementing Protocol 7, they'll just rebuild their operations somewhere else. All the people they've hurt, all the money they've stolen, none of it will ever be recovered. Agent Webb's expression was grim. Stopping them isn't going to be easy. The island is essentially a fortress, with private security forces, advanced surveillance systems, and defensive capabilities that could hold off a small army. Plus, it's in international waters, which means we need cooperation from multiple governments and agencies just to approach it legally. But Valentina had been studying the syndicate's operational records, and she had noticed something that might provide an opportunity. What if we don't try to storm the island, she suggested. What if we use their own systems against them? She pointed to a section of the database that detailed the syndicate's communication protocols. Look at this. They use the Oceanic Majesty's communication systems to coordinate with the island facility. According to these logs, the ship's systems are still connected to their primary network. Dr. Chen immediately understood the implications. If we can access their network through the ship's systems, we might be able to disrupt Protocol 7 from here, prevent the asset transfers, expose their client locations, maybe even trap some of their leadership before they can escape. Is that possible? Theoretically, yes. The ship's communication array is sophisticated enough to handle the data flow, and we have their network access codes from the database. The question is whether we can execute a cyber operation complex enough to shut down their entire infrastructure before they realize what's happening. Agent Webb was already coordinating with federal cyber warfare specialists, but time was running critically short. Protocol 7 was scheduled to begin in less than 16 hours, and the cyber operation would require at least 12 hours to plan and execute properly. We're going to have to move fast, Webb announced. I'm calling in every resource the Bureau has available, Cybercrimes Division, international coordination units, even some assets from agencies I can't officially acknowledge. If we're going to stop this, we need to hit them with everything we have. The next 14 hours transformed the Oceanic Majesty into something resembling a floating war room. Technical specialists arrived by helicopter and speedboat, bringing sophisticated computer equipment, satellite communication arrays, and cyber warfare tools that Valentina hadn't known existed. But as the operation took shape, it became clear that success would require more than just technical expertise. The syndicate's network was protected by multiple layers of security, and penetrating it would require inside knowledge that only someone familiar with their systems could provide. We need someone who understands their operational procedures, Dr. Chen explained during a critical planning session. Someone who knows how they think, how they operate, how they would respond to an intrusion attempt. That's when Valentina made a connection that changed everything. The corporate lawyer from the auction, she said suddenly. She's been trying to recover their assets and evidence. She must have access to their systems, and she's probably involved in coordinating Protocol 7. Agent Webb immediately understood. If we can intercept her communications, we might be able to use her access credentials to penetrate their network. More than that, Valentina continued. She's been desperate to get back onto this ship. What if we let her? The plan that emerged was audacious and dangerous. They would allow the corporate lawyer to return to the Oceanic Majesty, ostensibly to recover the syndicate's assets, while secretly monitoring her activities and using her network access to penetrate the island facilities systems. It's risky, Webb admitted. If she suspects what we're doing, she could warn the island and trigger Protocol 7 early, but it might be our only chance to get inside their network before they disappear permanently. The operation began at dawn on the third day, exactly 6 hours before Protocol 7 was scheduled to activate. Agent Webb contacted the corporate lawyer, identifying himself as a corrupt federal official who was willing to facilitate her access to the ship in exchange for a substantial bribe. The lawyer, who introduced herself as Victoria Hawthorne, arrived within 2 hours accompanied by a team of technical specialists. They believed they were conducting a legitimate evidence recovery operation, unaware that every move they made was being monitored and recorded by federal agents. She's accessing the primary communication array, Dr. Chen reported from her concealed monitoring station. Her credentials are valid, and she's connecting directly to the island facilities network. Using Hawthorne's access as a gateway, the FBI's cyber warfare team began their infiltration of the syndicate systems. What they found exceeded even their most optimistic expectations. The island facilities' computers contained detailed records of every operation the syndicate had ever conducted, financial transactions, client profiles, operational plans, and most importantly, real-time location data for everyone currently on the island or scheduled to arrive for the Protocol 7 evacuation. "My God," Agent Webb whispered as the data streamed across his screen. "There are over 400 people on that island right now. War criminals, corrupt officials, financial fraudsters. It's like a convention of international fugitives." But the cyber infiltration also revealed that Protocol 7 was even more comprehensive than they had suspected. The syndicate wasn't just planning to evacuate their current operation. They were planning to eliminate all evidence of their activities by destroying the island facility entirely. "They're going to blow up the island," Dr. Chen announced, her voice tight with concern. "According to these files, they've placed explosive charges throughout the underground facilities. Once the evacuation is complete, they're going to destroy everything, including the evidence we need to prosecute them," Webb realized, "and including any clients who might be considered security risks." Valentina added, reading over Dr. Chen's shoulder. "Look at this list. They're only evacuating about half the people currently on the island. The rest are classified as expendable assets. The syndicate was planning to murder over 200 people to protect their secrets. War criminals and financial fraudsters who had outlived their usefulness, along with any staff members who knew too much about the organization's operations. We can't let that happen," Valentina said firmly. "Whatever these people have done, they deserve to face justice, not be murdered to cover up someone else's crimes." Agent Webb was already coordinating with international law enforcement agencies, but the legal and logistical challenges of mounting a rapid response operation in international waters were enormous. Even with full cooperation from multiple governments, organizing a proper rescue and arrest operation would take days. Protocol 7 was scheduled to begin in 2 hours. That's when Valentina made a decision that would determine the fate of hundreds of lives and billions of dollars in stolen assets. "What if we don't wait for official authorization?" she asked. "What if we use the evidence we've gathered to expose everything right now, publicly, before they can activate Protocol 7? Expose it how? Live broadcast, social media, every news outlet on the planet. We release everything, the financial records, the client lists, the location of the island, the planned murders, make it impossible for them to continue operating because the entire world is watching." Dr. Chen immediately grasped the implications. If we dump their entire database online, with real-time location data and evidence of the planned executions, it would create so much international pressure that governments would have to respond immediately. It would also make us targets for the rest of our lives, Agent Webb warned. The syndicate has resources and connections that could pursue us anywhere in the world. They're already targeting us, Valentina replied. And if we don't stop them now, they'll disappear and rebuild their operations somewhere else. How many more countries will they destroy? How many more billions will they steal? How many more lives will they ruin? The decision to proceed with what they called Operation Sunlight was unanimous, but the execution required careful coordination to be effective. They had one chance to dump enough evidence into the public domain to make the syndicate's operations untenable, while simultaneously providing law enforcement agencies with the real-time intelligence they needed to intercept the evacuation and arrest the fugitives. Using the ship's communication array and Dr. Chen's technical expertise, they began broadcasting the syndicate's database to news outlets, law enforcement agencies, and social media platforms worldwide. The evidence included financial records proving the theft of over $40 billion, personal profiles of hundreds of international fugitives, operational plans detailing economic warfare against vulnerable nations, and most dramatically, real-time surveillance footage from Seraphim Island showing the preparation for mass murder. The global response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 30 minutes of the initial broadcast, "My God," Agent Webb whispered as the data streamed across his screen. "There are over 400 people on that island right now, war criminals, corrupt officials, financial fraudsters. It's like a convention of international fugitives." But the cyber infiltration also revealed that Protocol 7 was even more comprehensive than they had suspected. The syndicate wasn't just planning to evacuate their current operation. They were planning to eliminate all evidence of their activities by destroying the island facility entirely. "They're going to blow up the island," Dr. Chen announced, her voice tight with concern. "According to these files, they've placed explosive charges throughout the underground facilities. Once the evacuation is complete, they're going to destroy everything, including the evidence we need to prosecute them," Webb realized, "and including any clients who might be considered security risks." Valentina added, reading over Dr. Chen's shoulder. "Look at this list. They're only evacuating about half the people currently on the island. The rest are classified as expendable assets." The syndicate was planning to murder over 200 people to protect their secrets. War criminals and financial fraudsters who had outlived their usefulness, along with any staff members who knew too much about the organization's operations. "We can't let that happen," Valentina said firmly. "Whatever these people have done, they deserve to face justice, not be murdered to cover up someone else's crimes." Agent Webb was already coordinating with international law enforcement agencies, but the legal and logistical challenges of mounting a rapid response operation in international waters were enormous. Even with full cooperation from multiple governments, organizing a proper rescue and arrest operation would take days. Protocol 7 was scheduled to begin in 2 hours. That's when Valentina made a decision that would determine the fate of hundreds of lives and billions of dollars in stolen assets. "What if we don't wait for official authorization?" she asked. "What if we use the evidence we've gathered to expose everything right now, publicly, before they can activate Protocol 7? Expose it how? Live broadcast, social media, every news outlet on the planet. We release everything. The financial records, The client lists, the location of the island, the planned murders, make it impossible for them to continue operating because the entire world is watching. Dr. Chen immediately grasped the implications. If we dump their entire database online, with real-time location data and evidence of the planned executions, it would create so much international pressure that governments would have to respond immediately. It would also make us targets for the rest of our lives, Agent Webb warned. The syndicate has resources and connections that could pursue us anywhere in the world. They're already targeting us, Valentina replied. And if we don't stop them now, they'll disappear and rebuild their operations somewhere else. How many more countries will they destroy? How many more billions will they steal? How many more lives will they ruin? The decision to proceed with what they called Operation Sunlight was unanimous, but the execution required careful coordination to be effective. They had one chance to dump enough evidence into the public domain to make the syndicate's operations untenable, while simultaneously providing law enforcement agencies with the real-time intelligence they needed to intercept the evacuation and arrest the fugitives. Using the ship's communication array and Dr. Chen's technical expertise, they began broadcasting the syndicate's database to news outlets, law enforcement agencies, and social media platforms worldwide. The evidence included financial records proving the theft of over $40 billion, personal profiles of hundreds of international fugitives, operational plans detailing economic warfare against vulnerable nations, and most dramatically, real-time surveillance footage from Seraphim Island showing the preparation for mass murder. The global response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 30 minutes of the initial broadcast, news outlets on every continent were running the story. International law enforcement